Hello everybody, this is Gary Merzinski and this is Chapter 8, Part C. Chapter 8 of The Microeconomy Today by Schiller and Gebhardt, published by McGraw-Hill. In Chapter 8, we're addressing pure competition. So we're considering what an individual firm is experiencing when they compete in a market structure that's considered pure competition. So this is a standardized product. There are many sellers, hundreds of them, or even thousands of them. So no one seller has any market power. You have zero market power in this kind of a market structure. And so they are price takers, which means that the market dictates the market price, and then every seller must sell at that market price. This is pure competition. So the individual firm's demand curve looks unusual. It's a horizontal line, right? All right, so that was just a quick review. In Part C, we're going to talk about what's known as the shutdown decision. Believe it or not, in the short run, and this whole chapter is addressing the short run, in the short run, a firm will decide to continue producing even at a loss if they're at least covering their variable costs. In other words, if the revenue that they get from staying open and producing is at least greater than the variable costs of remaining open. If the revenue is not, then they'll shut down. And I'll explain all of this and give you some examples of how this might happen. So again, this is only in the short run. In the long run, a firm would not choose to produce at a loss, but in the short run, you might. So we're going to talk about what's known as the shutdown decision. Again, you will choose to produce in the short run if you're at least covering your variable costs. So we're going to follow the profit maximization rule. So if you're looking at graphs, and you'll see one on the next slide, you're going to do what we've already been doing, which is you're going to find the point, find the Q for which marginal revenue equals marginal cost. You should increase Q, increase how much you're producing per unit time, number of units per day. You should increase that as long as the marginal revenue of the increase is greater than the marginal cost. Eventually, you get to the point where marginal revenue and marginal cost are exactly equal. Stop there and produce that amount per unit time. And because this is pure competition, price is equal to marginal revenue. That only happens with pure competition. So then you're looking for where price is equal to marginal cost. And price comes from the demand curve, right? All right, and we'll look at that on the slide on the next, the graph on the next slide. If the price falls below average total cost, then you're experiencing a loss. You'll do that in the short run as long as the price does not fall below average variable cost. Remember, these are both U-shaped curves, and remember that you'll always be producing somewhere on the marginal cost curve because you're looking at the intersection of price and marginal cost. Well, it's helpful to know that marginal cost intersects with the U-shaped average total cost curve at its minimum and with the U-shaped average variable cost curve at its minimum. So there's our curve. And you can see the dashed U-shaped curve is average total cost, and the solid U-shaped curve below it is average variable cost. The horizontal line is our demand curve. This is for the individual firm in pure competition. All right, so if I were to ask you what's the deal with this, if this graph represents a firm, you would say, well, this firm is going to be profitable. You follow the profit maximization rule. You would produce that level of Q for which marginal revenue equals marginal cost. And remember, marginal revenue and price are the same thing with pure competition. It's that horizontal line that gives you the price. It's also marginal revenue. So where does the horizontal line intersect with marginal cost? At point X. All right, drop down to the x-axis. That corresponds with 4 bushels of fish per day. That's the profit maximizing level of output. All right, so now go vertically from 4 bushels on the x-axis. Go vertically and pick out price. Okay, that's the horizontal line. Now how about average total cost from the U-shaped curve? Looks like that's about $11. So there's, let's see, $13 minus $11, $2 of profit per unit times 4 units $8 of profit. That's the orange shaded box. That represents profit. But what if the price were to drop? And the price is dictated by the market. So when the price drops, the individual firm sees its demand curve go down. And here we don't have the y-axis labeled, but each of these grids is $2, I believe. So 2, 4, 6, 8. It looks like the price dropped down to $9. What's the deal here? Well, you're going to follow the profit maximization rule. You're going to find where marginal revenue, which is the price curve, intersects with the marginal cost curve. That's at point Y. Drop down to the x-axis. Well, you would produce 3 bushels of fish per day, and that's your best profit situation. But your profit situation is a loss. So really, this rule we're using is the profit maximization / loss minimization rule. This is where your loss would be minimized. You're going to lose money, right, if you choose to produce at a price of $9, the price that's dictated by the market. You could shut down if you want to, but I'm going to explain to you that you would actually lose more money if you shut down. If you produce at $9 a bushel and you produce 3 bushels per day, yes, you're going to be producing at a loss, but you are covering all of the variable costs to produce. As long as you're covering all of your variable costs, it makes sense to produce. And if your revenue is greater than your variable costs, then of course you're paying for all your variable costs plus some of your fixed costs. This is only in the short run. Because it's the short run, you have fixed costs. If you shut down, your total cost is equal to your fixed cost. If you choose to produce, in this case, even at loss, your total cost is going to be less than your fixed cost because you're paying all of your variable costs plus some of your fixed costs. So as long as you're producing at a price that's greater than average variable cost, you produce. Imagine that the price were to drop down to something lower than this. So in this example, it looks like the price has dropped to $4. Each of the grids on the y-axis is $2, and it looks like we're at $4 now. Now, no matter how much you produce, the price is less than average variable cost. You are no longer covering your variable costs. So if you shut down, your total cost would be your fixed cost. If you chose to produce whatever amount you would choose to produce, then your total cost would be greater than your fixed costs. So shut down and your total cost is whatever your fixed costs are, and that's what your loss is, right? Your loss is greater if you choose to produce in this case because you're paying your fixed costs plus some of the variable costs. Shut down, your total cost will be just your fixed costs. And of course it's a loss. These are just some cleaner looking curves. In this example, if you were to look at it, you would say, okay, this firm should produce where marginal revenue and marginal costs are intersecting, and that's at $10. This firm would produce 50 units. What would the profit be? Well, go up to the average total cost curve at 50, Q equal to 50. It looks like average total cost is $6. The price is $10. So profit is the quantity 10 minus 6 times 50. So that would be $4 times 50 units, or $200. So this is a firm that would be profitable. And profit is represented by that rectangle in the pink. Here's an example of the firm that is not profitable. Now, we don't have the average variable cost curve here, which is what you would need to decide whether to produce at a loss or not. But how much would the loss be? Well, no matter what Q you produce at, price is going to be less than average total cost because the whole price curve is below the U-shaped average total cost curve. You still follow the profit maximization / loss minimization rule, which is look for the intersection of marginal revenue and marginal cost Okay, that happens at Q equal to 30, and then produce that amount. At Q equal to 30, average total cost is $5, price is $3, so you're actually, so this would be the quantity 3 minus 5 times 30. So it would be minus 2 times 30, minus $60. So profit is minus $60. The loss is $60, just to clarify. So why is it you should produce in the short run, even at a loss, as long as you're at least covering your variable costs? Because your fixed plant you have to pay for anyway. So don't think about that. That should not influence your decision to produce if you have to produce at a loss in the short run. Fixed costs are sunk costs. You have to pay them anyway. Think of what happened during the pandemic when firms were forced to shut down. The government made them close. Think about the costs they had to pay anyway. Those are their fixed costs. So what would that be? Well, maybe it's a restaurant that you got to pay for your facilities. So maybe you're leasing the space. Well, you're paying your lease even in the months that you're not producing. Maybe you own your space and you're paying a mortgage on it. Well, you've got to pay that mortgage every month, even if you're not producing. You have to have the place insured. Everything else that you have to pay, even if you're not producing. So those are sunk costs. Here's some examples. This first one, I'm thinking of a great example near me of a very fancy restaurant, kind of fancy anyway, upscale, and they do a very good dinner business. It's in a fancy looking office building, really nice facilities inside. It looks beautiful inside. An entree might be $25 to $35, and they're crowded every night, take reservations, and you got to imagine that their fixed costs are expensive because they're leasing the space from the building owner, and it's a expensive space to lease, and it's very nice inside, and of course the kitchen equipment the restaurant owner probably paid to have installed and is probably paying off a loan. So these are all part of the fixed costs you can imagine. They're open for lunch also, and when they're open for lunch and you go in there, it might only be half full, and their prices are competitive with other places. Excuse me, maybe like $12 for a lunch, $10 to $12, just like other places that are not as fancy. And you wonder, why would they be open during lunch when they're in this expensive place? Well, they only care about covering their variable costs. The variable costs of being open for lunch. What are their variable costs? Well, the labor, they'll have half the staff there that they would need, compared to if it were full. So they'll have servers, and they'll have kitchen staff, and of course the food supplies that they're going to use to prepare the meals. As long as they're covering those variable costs of producing during the lunch hour, and maybe their revenue that they generate during the lunch time period is greater than the variable costs, it might be at a loss, but they would continue to produce lunches because they're paying all their variable costs and they're paying off some of those fixed costs. The fixed costs are there anyway because they're serving dinners. So this is why they would choose to produce, even though overall they're producing at a loss during lunch, because they're producing and covering their variable costs. That's all they care about. Here's another example that I think about whenever I'm on vacation. And we go to this shore town during peak season, and we go there during the off season, even during February sometimes, February, March. And this is like other beach towns, a place that has a mini golf on almost every corner. There's lots of them. Think about the costs for that business. Most of them are fixed costs. What are the variable costs? The costs of, some small materials costs, but mostly labor. Low cost labor though, right? People that work there don't make a lot of money. Usually young people doing it as a part-time job. And most of their costs is the cost to lease the space. Somebody owns that property, very expensive property because it's in a shore town. Usually it's a couple blocks from the water. And that would be very expensive commercial real estate. They're either leasing it or it's less likely that they actually own it, but maybe they do. Well, either way, it's very expensive. Why would they be open in February? If you drive by in February, you might see like one group of people on hole 8, let's say, and the rest of the 17 holes are unoccupied. Why would they remain open with that little business going on? Because they only care about covering their variable costs. What are their variable costs? There's one person working there making whatever the market minimum wage would be. Maybe it's $13 an hour or something like that. As long as they're generating $13 in revenue an hour, and that one group would represent $13 of revenue, that one group that's golfing on hole 8, as long as they're doing that, the marginal revenue of remaining open in February is greater than the marginal cost of remaining open in February. As long as you're doing that, and this is a business that would be generating more marginal revenue during a day in February than the marginal cost during the day in February, then you're paying all of your variable costs, plus you're paying off some of those fixed costs, which are, the lease or the mortgage if you own the land that it's on. So what is the shutdown point? Let's just review this now. So you will produce in the short run if you're a purely competitive firm, if you're at least covering your variable costs. So the price might be less than your average total cost, but as long as it's greater than average variable cost, you will produce. So then the shutdown point is at the minimum average variable cost. And the reason for that is, remember, you're always producing on the marginal cost curve, and the marginal cost curve will intersect the average variable cost curve at its minimum. I'll show you the graph in a second. All right? So then, if you're looking at a table of data, simply look for the average variable cost column, and then go down the column wherever the smallest dollar amount is. That is your shutdown price. You will not produce at a price less than that, because that must be the bottom of the U, right? So let's talk about the supply curve for the individual firm. I keep saying you're always going to produce somewhere on the marginal cost curve, because you're looking at that horizontal price curve go up and go down, but still always looking at where it intersects with marginal cost. That means the marginal cost curve is actually the supply curve for the individual firm. The marginal cost curve is the supply curve. And the marginal cost curve, the more you think about it, it kind of makes sense, doesn't it? It curves upwards, it goes uphill, and for all of the reasons that the law of supply is the law of supply. So there you can see the marginal cost curve, the two U-shaped curves, and then overlaid on top of that is the red curve. The red curve is the supply curve. So you're always going to be producing. There's no demand curve shown here, which is where you get price from, but you can imagine it being somewhere above the average total cost curve, the horizontal demand curve, looking for the intersection, and imagine it dropping down. Okay, now it's below average total cost, the horizontal price curve, demand curve. You're still going to be producing at the intersection with marginal cost. Once you reach the bottom of the average variable cost curve, you will, anything lower than that, you will produce zero. So that's why this red supply curve jumps to the y-axis and goes right to zero, which means on the horizontal axis you're producing zero for any price less than the minimum average variable cost. So one more time, if you're trying to figure out what is the shutdown price, the price below which you will shut down, it is where the minimum average variable cost occurs. If you're looking at the graph, it would be labeled on the y-axis. It's not labeled here, but whatever price would correspond with where the graph jumps over to the y-axis and goes to q equal to 0, whatever price that is, that's the bottom of the average variable cost U-shaped curve. If you're looking at a table of data, it's easy too. You just identify the column that gives you average variable cost, go down the column, look for the smallest dollar value. Whatever the smallest dollar value is, that's the minimum average variable cost. That is the shutdown price. You will choose to shut down for any price less than that. If the price is greater than or equal to that, you will choose to produce because you're paying off your variable costs if you produce even at a loss. And if the price is greater than average variable cost, then you're paying some of your fixed costs off too. Do you remember the determinants of supply from Chapter 3? These are the determinants of a firm's marginal costs, really, when you think about it. That's why the marginal cost curve is the supply curve. If something happens to the price of factor inputs, if the price of the resources you use to produce your product were to go up or go down, maybe it's a raw material of some sort, that's going to shift your marginal cost curve. What if technology improves? That will shift your marginal cost curve to the right, right? Remember, that's the one supply curve shifter that only goes in one direction. Expectations. If your expectations about the market price in the future are optimistic or pessimistic, that could shift your marginal cost curve. And then if the government were to apply a tax on a business firm or subsidize the business firm, which is a negative tax, that would shift the marginal cost curve, which is your supply curve. And that's what this slide is explaining to you. Now, when we get to Chapter 9, we're going to talk about the market as a whole. In this chapter, we focused on the individual firm and the decisions that an individual firm will make and the behavior of an individual firm. In Chapter 9, we're going to talk about the market and what will be the long-run equilibrium. In the short run, the only decision the firm has to make is whether to produce or not and what level of Q to produce at. The price is dictated by the market. They only are deciding what Q should I choose, the profit maximizing / loss minimizing level of output, right? In the long run, the decision is the investment decision. The investment decision is whether to enter the market to begin with or to leave the market, right? Entry or exit is a long-run decision. Exit would mean you're losing money in the long run and you're going to liquidate your fixed plant, sell it off, and get into some other kind of business, right? Maybe you're in some other kind of business and you're thinking about getting into a more profitable business. That's the entry decision. In either case, it's an investment decision. Or maybe you're already in the market and the question is whether you should expand your fixed plant, go from a small size facility to a medium sized facility as we discussed in Chapter 7. That is an investment decision. That's something you do in the long run. So again, we're going to address the long run in Chapter 9. So I'll see you there.